As many of you know, I decided to become a rabbi because of my concern, or perhaps more accurate description would be because of my obsession about the survival of the Jewish people. It's a concern that has not diminished since I first became ordained as a rabbi in 1979. One way this is reflected and evident is in the prayer that I composed, in which our B'nai Mitzvah read when they stand before the Aron HaKodesh, the Holy Ark. Before they are about to read from the Torah, the prayer that they say says in part, quote, "I pray that I will be worthy of the beautiful tradition that has been transmitted to me by my family and teachers, and that I will do my part to maintain and perpetuate our heritage and people." The children sometimes stumble over the pronunciation of that word perpetuate, but I have not changed it because I feel it's important for them to understand that this is now their obligation, their inheritance, as in the words of the prayer, to perpetuate and to ensure the continuity of the Jewish people. I want them to recognize that they still have much to learn about Judaism, as the prayer says, so that as they proclaim, quote, "Its teachings will thereby be a guide for my path, my actions, and the decisions I make." Now, incidentally, I want you to know, in all the years that I've been your rabbi, and of all the B'nai Mitzvah that we've had, only one child has ever questioned and said to me, "I don't remember agreeing to this." And then she went on to say, "It sounds much more like something a 30-year-old man would say and not a 13-year-old kid." That child, of course, would be my granddaughter, Olivia. She got me on that one. I believe that to be a Jew is interesting, for among other things, it is intellectually compelling, stimulating, and challenging. It demands of us, or at least offers us the opportunity to grapple with sophisticated, deep philosophical concepts. It's a way of life which offers meaning and balancing the touch point of conflicting ideas. Elie Wiesel wrote in his book, A Jew Today, that to be a Jew is to be offered a gift. And that's what it is. It is a gift. It means being part of a people that despite all we have given the world, despite all the contributions we have made to make the world a better place, to impress upon all our obligation of all of us to treat all of God's creatures with respect and dignity, all we have done to teach about caring for the environment, God, and each other, despite all that we have done, whether as individuals or as a people, whether by our sages in the ancient times or rabbis of today, whether by those immersed in Judaism or those who are secularists trying to escape and distance themselves from their heritage, despite wanting little more than to survive, the desire on the part of the outside world to extinguish the light of Judaism remains strong. As we've seen in recent months, that hatred has not gone away. In fact, it appears to be more prevalent and stronger than ever, and it seems somehow to have taken on a new life in the light of October 7th. We need to recognize that we may never succeed in fully extinguishing the embers of hatred of Jews, because they're always going to simmer beneath the surface when they're not out in the open. But the answer to those who want us to disappear is to deny them the satisfaction of achieving their goal. We dare not surrender or submit to intimidation. We must resist the temptation to succumb to fear, the temptation to forego and abandon our observance. I often wonder and seek to understand what is the source of the strength, where that will to live comes from, the tenacity of our ancestors to resist all attempts throughout the millennia to obliterate us. And perhaps the secret is found in something I once read somewhere, that while Jewish history may lead one to be pessimistic, when one looks at life from the perspective of the Jewish religion, the conclusion is to be hopeful and optimistic. I think of my obligation and what I owe those who came before me, those people I never knew, those ancestors, and those among our sages who made sacrifices so that I and you and we would be here today, so that Judaism would survive. People connect to Judaism on different levels, be it because of anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, or Israel. It could come from the intellectual, emotional, or spiritual satisfaction that Judaism offers. It could be through food, Jewish humor, pride in Jewish accomplishments, or an appreciation of Jewish history or philosophy. There are those who feel a sense of responsibility for our fellow Jews, those who came before us, those who will come after us, and those Jewish communities elsewhere as we are dispersed throughout the world. Regardless of the source of the connection, whatever it may be, as my generation used to say, whatever turns you on, deepen that connection. Keep in mind that without a Jewish identity, there is no hope of connection to Jewish sources, the Jewish people, to Israel, or to our future, or our past. I'm fascinated by the dance into and out of the societies that have surrounded us over the ages, the dispersed places we've lived in throughout the diaspora across the world, like a moth, drawn to the fire, sometimes singed by it, sometimes consumed, sometimes repelled, sometimes influenced by the society in which we live, sometimes resenting and rejecting it, sometimes wanting to embrace and be a part of it, sometimes adapting parts of it, sometimes allowed entry only to rise to heights unexpected, only then to be knocked down and expelled, sometimes shamed and kept out, sometimes resisting, sometimes adapting and integrating it, sometimes remaining apart and aloof from that society. And through it all, we have found a way to keep Judaism alive. And so it's incumbent upon us, the most recent chapter in the unfolding story of the Jewish people, to do so in a way that ensures authenticity and continuity, to make sure that the gift of Judaism is passed on to the next and future generations, maintaining coexistence within the host societies where we live, but without being overcome by acculturation, assimilation, or abandonment. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks wrote, quote, "To be a Jew is to be part of the most remarkable story ever lived by any people, covering more countries, more adverse circumstances, more triumphs and tragedies than any other story or any other people. Every one of us has a chapter to write in that story." And that's what we're doing when we live our lives as Jews, when we're part of this congregation and this community. Elie Wiesel once wrote, "The mission of the Jew was never to make the world more Jewish, only more human." That is what it means to be a Jew. Judaism is this eternal conversation, and a conversation which goes across and spans across the ages, between us and the text, between us and those who came before us, between us and God, between us and our fellow Jews. It's an eternal quest for that connection, linking us to those who came before us and before the eternal divine Holy One, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Larry Hoffman, a theologian, quoting Eugene Borowitz, said about belief in God, that it's not just an idea. It means so much more than just to say, I believe in God, or do you believe in God? He says the more appropriate question is not, do you believe in God, but rather, is God real in your life or not? In other words, what difference does it make in your life if you believe in God? Because God becomes real through experience. Last night I told the story about a confirmation class student from over 40 years ago who remembered the story I told him about the man who saw to it that when something was included in a purchase that he had made that had not been paid for or bargained for, and that precious jewel had to be returned. And he shared with me how that story, that ethical teaching, influenced not just him, but his daughter as well. That's what it means to be a Jew as well, to be guided by these teachings. That's what it means to believe in God, is to take it into our everyday lives. The world may have liked us much better when we were powerless victims, but it didn't do very much to protect us at that time. And so now we have a country, we have a state of Israel, which is able to protect the Jewish people. We, throughout our history, don't like to play the victim, But there are times we are victims. But we've never had a victim ideology or mentality. And so there are those among us who sometimes are uncomfortable to see Jews with power or Jews fighting back. Having been victims of prejudice and mischaracterization throughout our history, I think it's the ultimate chutzpah that after centuries of evictions, persecutions, oppressions, mischaracterizations, forced conversion, that the ultimate chutzpah is that after all of this, with no country of our own, no independent power of our own in the past, we're accused of being colonizers or of being privileged. And so when we look at what's happening to our brothers and sisters in Israel, the conflict over Israel and Zionism and its very existence, let us always keep in mind the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians has nothing to do with land whatsoever. If that were the case, the many offers throughout the years for a Palestinian state would have been accepted. Or, as I said just last week, if it was a conflict about land, if it was a real estate deal, we Jews would have known how to make it happen long ago. There are those among us today, unfortunately, who have, as there always have been, who identify with our enemies, with those who seek our destruction. They may cite Jewish text to support their conclusions, but they forget the first part of Hillel's statement, as they state that if I am only for myself, what am I? But we must remember the first part of what Hillel had said was, Im ein ani li mili, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And then he said, but if I'm only for myself, then what am I? Ve'im lo akshav ematai, and if not, now when? And so our first responsibility is to our people, but that's not our exclusive and sole responsibility. It is why, as I said, we've made so many contributions to the world over the millennia. And so, in citing Jewish texts, I think it's important to realize that those Jewish texts they cite sometimes to support their positions, we have to remember, Jewish texts can never be more important than Jewish lives. And so I reject the notion that the only way to engender affection for Israel among young people is by criticizing her. As I've said to colleagues on numerous occasions, our voices of criticism dare not be louder than our expressions of love. And so I'm guided by these words, and that is that I've shared with others. We do not necessarily love Israel because she is perfect, nor do we need Israel to be perfect for us to love her. And so Israel has been a central focus of my rabbinate. That's because it's a sense of peoplehood. You know, when Ruth became and declared that she wanted to become a part of the Jewish people, first she said, your people will be my people. That's central. And Ahavat Yisrael, love of our fellow Jews, must always permeate our actions, our thoughts, and what we do. So how do we do that? How do we strengthen Israel? How do we strengthen the Jewish people? We do so by strengthening Judaism, by living Jewish lives, by learning and studying Judaism, by observing it. When Golda Meir was asked in 1973, after the Yom Kippur War, what Jews around the world could do to support Israel, she very simply had two words. She said, stay Jewish. That was her message then. It's equally appropriate now. Quoting Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik wrote in a recent issue of Commentary magazine, quote, several centuries of Western thought have left us with the ideas that when we choose how to live, we're on our own. Nothing in the past binds us. We are whoever we choose to be. But it is against this idea, this very notion, that Jewish life is a sustained counter-voice. To be a Jew is to know this, that this cannot be the full story of who I am. We are part of something much larger, a melody rather than a sequence of disconnected notes. A painting is something other than a random set of brushstrokes. The part has meaning in terms of its place within the whole, so that if history has any meaning, then the lives that make it up must in some way be joined to one another as characters in a narrative. A story is told in a book called Merchant Princes, which chronicles the history and development of the great department stores in this country, most of which were started by poor Jewish immigrant peddlers who came to America with little on their backs in the 19th century. And the founder of one of these great department stores came in one day, and he saw that the store was closed, but everyone was very busy. And so he asked his grandson, who now was running and was in charge of operations, what was going on. And he was told that it was so that every department could take inventory. I, like some of you, may still recall the days before computerization when this was done once a year, usually in January. Some of you remember that? The stores would close. And so as he saw everyone was busy working and calculating and writing down things, he called his grandson into his office and he opened his desk and he said to him that he took out a few small things, a few buttons, some thimbles, a few other knickknacks and other things, and he said to his grandson, who now was running the operation, he said, "This is the inventory." And pointing to everything that now encompassed the many floors, he said, "All of that, that's the profit. That's the profit." And so I think about B'nai Tzedek. We started very small with humble beginnings, and we now have the profit. The profit of being able to be a vibrant, dynamic congregation. Whether that inventory, whether the foundation, the basis is Torah, whether it is our ancestors, our heritage, whatever it may be, but we continue to build upon it and make our lives richer because of it. There's a story that's told that a chassid once came to his Rebbe, and he was excited to tell him. He said to him, "Rebbe, I had the most amazing dream, and I had the same dream 3 nights in a row, so I want you to tell me what it means." And the rabbi said, "Okay, tell me, what was your dream?" And the young man said to him, "For the past 3 nights, I've dreamt that I am a Rebbe of 200 chassidim, that I have 200 followers. Rebbe, tell me, what does that mean?" And the learned Rebbe listened, stroked his beard, and when his young disciple finished speaking, he quietly responded, "Until 200 chassidim have a dream that you're their Rebbe, it means nothing." And so in conclusion, I would like to say, I thank you for allowing me to help my dream become a reality. Shabbat Shalom.